The Apostle Paul writes to his young friend Timothy, "I'm grateful to God, whom I worship with a clear conscience, as did my forebears, when I remember you constantly in my prayers night and day. I remember your tears and long to see you again so that we may be filled with joy. I remember always your sincere faith, the faith that lived first of all in your grandmother Lois, and then in your mother Eunice, and now therefore I am sure lives in you." The baby was extra clingy today. At 18 months, Monica had just this week cut 2 of her 3 emerging molars, which had been bulging and sore for weeks. She did not want to be put down and kept coming to grab my legs as I tried to make sandwiches for the older children, unloading the dishwasher, fold the laundry. But today was a hard day. Last night I stayed up much too late reading, which is the only time I can do it anymore, and got up several times to comfort Monica after the Tylenol wore off around 2 a.m. All morning the children quarreled, and mediating between the irrationality of the 3-year-old John and the legalisms of 5-year-old Abigail had just about done me in. Of course, then there was this trouble with the fruit drawer, which entailed moving the entire refrigerator just to get the door closed again. No amount of coffee seemed to help. By 3 this afternoon, as I drove over to pick up Abigail from the kindergarten, I was neck deep in self-pity. Why did I think that this was what I wanted? What was so bad about wearing pantyhose and working for pay? So much of my day was taken up with triviality, frustration, and minutia. When I got home, I realized I'd forgotten to take the meat out of the freezer. Then the cat threw up. But I did give Monica some more baby Tylenol, so that was good. And I did get a chance finally to brush my hair. That's the day in the life of one real mother named Sybil Neiman. And who am I to begin to pretend to know what that was like? I've never been a mother. In fact, almost 50 years ago in seminary, they told me never to preach on mother. They said, you'll idealize her clear off the planet and inflict nothing but guilt on the real mothers sitting there. And they already have capacity for that enough without you bothering them. So I got the permission of 3 real live mothers to speak this morning. My mother, my wife, and my daughter. All who, they say, have had days very much like this one. So let me, in the first instance, lift up the reality that on this day we honor and celebrate the special role of mother for very special reasons. No matter how important you count political power, industrial productivity, material wealth, technological wizardry, religious community, the panoply of all the arts, it'll all be gone in less than 100 years without this one person and her willingness to bring into being another generation. In fact, there are countries in Western Europe now who are anxious and preoccupied by the growing lack of mothers so willing. A decline in population in many of them that is having serious political, economic, and social consequences. Families in Spain, for example, a Roman Catholic culture, are averaging now but 1 child per family. That trend line can lead to nothing but disaster. Thank God the numbers of willing mothers around here does not seem to have diminished very much. Some 3 million new mothers each year in this country. And I think we can thank mothers for many things this morning, but if you're like me, I think you will thank her most profoundly for the fact that we're all here. Without that, none of the rest of her gifts to me, to you, would have even come into play. But in our time, mother is going up against some very real obstacles. She nurtures in our day against omnipresent forces that also have their own agenda, driven by intention or accident or economics. My mother did not have to fight off the impact of television vulgarity and violence. About the only voices outside of family and school and church that I was subjected to were those of Jack Armstrong, Captain Midnight, the Lone Ranger, and all the pictures were in my own head. But 28 hours a day of foreign and often foul education over the tube is a hard enemy to counter. Every year, the average American child watches more than 1,000 stylized and explicit murders, armed robberies, and assaults on television. And even if you try to discipline its use in your own home, you can't get away from it entirely. There are peers, there are other television sets around. So mother has to mother, I say, against outside influences that penetrate the psyches of her children at earlier and earlier ages. And she has to do a lot of it almost alone, or at least she has more of the task on her hands than did her grandmother. I mean, reflect on the fact that in 1900, a majority of Americans lived on farms, which meant the children grew up working alongside mother and father, who was almost equally present, and they grew up in the context of an extended family of uncles and aunts, and cousins and grandparents, and dogs and cats, and cows and pigs. And there were stable relationships that had begun well before kindergarten, of long duration, to support and spell off mother. How all that has changed. Fathers, often of necessity, abandon their family for 10, 12-hour days as they disappear into aluminum and steel transports to another planet. And increasingly, a majority of mothers find it important or necessary to stay in the work world also, outside the home. And friends come and go at the beckon of corporate America, and the extended family is very often scattered to the winds. So mother has to do the job against early and alien influence, and she has to do far more of it alone, and she has to do it also with experts whispering in her ear, suggesting that she really doesn't know what she's doing, except she's probably doing a lot of damage. Professor Robert Cole, well-known psychiatrist at Harvard, wrote this: "We can't feed our children, discipline them, select schools, books, or games for them. Even, it seems, have an ordinary conversation with them without consulting someone who claims to be in the know. This loss of self-respect and confidence and common sense is the principal reason why we turn to specialists, as if God had chosen to reveal himself through them." Now, in fact, this is nothing new. Advice books have sold well for centuries because mothers have perennially feared making mistakes that might damage their kids. John Locke, a popular 17th century philosopher and advice giver, felt it was unhealthy to give water to a thirsty child without first giving him bread. And it was harmful for children to eat melons, peaches, and grapes because they are unwholesome, although strawberries and cherries were okay. A century later, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, might know be a Frenchman, thought water for thirsty children was fine, but red meat wasn't because it might make the young too fierce. He suggested a diet of cake and milk. The fact that Locke was childless and that Rousseau made his mistress put all 5 of their children into a foundling hospital where they died didn't seem to affect their advice-giving sense of entitlement one bit. I really don't think our time has been a whole lot sounder and steadier in its proffered wisdom. Feed them by the clock, don't feed them by the clock. Hug them, don't hug them. Set limits, don't be rigid. Let them cry, don't let them cry. Give them milk, milk may be bad for them. Give them fruits and vegetables, the pesticides may poison them. Don't let them into your bed, it'll traumatize them. Okay, let them in, it'll enable them to attach earlier. So at times unsure of herself and often alone, fighting a world of alien influences, we ought to be astonished. We ought to be astonished that she's doing the job so well. There are very few mothers who simply abandon the job. Mothers were amazed and grateful at how well most of you manage with all this to handle. If the little ones who march through here week in, week out, robbing my cookie drawer, are any indication of what the next generation might be, I do not think we need to be overwrought. But mother will always be at the center of the gift of the next generation because she knows in her bones what it takes to birth and mature life. Mothers have always done it, long before the books. And in this sense, I think, she is closer to the meaning of God for human existence than anyone else. At the heart of the story of Jesus is this conviction that the life of Jesus was a special act of God, so special that it ranked right up there with God's creation of the very first man. And yet with this new creation, God seems to need the willing help of a woman. Mary holds it in her hands when the angel messenger appears to say yes or no. And she finally says, "Here I am, let it be according to your word." She assents to the Almighty, and the greatest story ever told gets underway. Only Christianity puts a woman front and center as the bearer of the faith. And when Paul applauds Timothy, his adopted son, for his faith, he credits it to, guess who? Mother Eunice and grandmother Lois. Mothers, I suggest, unless corrupted and led astray by a culture that is not child-friendly or much interested in the future, know somehow instinctually what it takes, how to stand in for God for a time, a precious time, a brief time, but an important time. Mother, more than anyone else, is God to that little infant. The experience of God, for Christians at least, is about the experience of law and grace. And mothers are the ones who most strongly bring these to bear upon that young life. I mean, nurturing healthy children means law, does it not? It means enabling self-discipline and self-control. It means training them. And training them means saying it again and again, patiently but firmly, by how you act as well as by what you say. It's a long, boring, tedious, but absolutely necessary process. The biblical understanding of us does not allow for that foolish, secular assumption that, children are resilient, all you have to do is get out of the way, and the kids will naturally grow up to be considerate and clever and competent. Real humanity, consisting of contribution and caring and the capacity to get along, does not happen naturally. We have to be trained into it. And guess who gets the job? If you read the book of Deuteronomy about our responsibility toward our children, you will find it so repetitive it is frankly boring. Over and over again, be careful, remember, do this, don't do that. Suddenly occurred to me one day when I was reading the old text that this God seems an awful like a mother. He's a nag. Why? It takes a long time to get it. We forget. Jean Kajowski is an elementary school teacher. She writes, "I was late for a seminar on children with attention difficulties. After hurrying into the building, I asked a receptionist where the meeting was, and she pointed to a set of double doors and said matter-of-factly, 'I told you 100 times through there.' Angered by the seemingly inappropriate demand and reprimand, I felt the urge to explain my tardiness, but instead I thought better and rushed into the room and took a seat. I soon calmed down, however, as I looked at the program and saw the conference title. It read, 'I've told you 100 times.' Nurture is a matter of telling it 100 times. It's a matter of training in skills and rules and habits and manners and boundaries, ordinances, precepts, commandments, these commandments which I give you this day. Mother knows to do it. There's a sense, of course, in which the job belongs to every one of us. But fathers in our time and with our schedules too often must leave her alone with it, and teachers certainly refrain from getting into it, into parenting and morals. So mother needs all the reinforcement she can get from every side. Kids are not dumb. They invented the tactic of divide and conquer. We need networks, all kinds of them, in place of those old-time friendships. We need communities like the church in place of the old extended families. So it takes training and accountability, but it also takes affirmation and tender, loving care. And note who gives it. And without it, children die. Ave Maria, gratia plene, Hail Mary, full of grace. And because of Mary and Jesus, one can say that of Dorothy and Barbara and Carolyn and Evelyn and Elizabeth, full of grace. Mothers almost always are. Remember the scene in the Gospels where the mothers bring their children for Jesus to touch? As a matter of fact, I looked that text up and I discovered something. It doesn't say who brought them. But I'm willing to stand here and assure you that it was the mothers who brought them, because the guys rebuke them. The great man has no time for mere children. His ministry is about more important matters like transforming the world. Jesus is furious. He insists that children are precisely what his mission is all about. They are the epitome of the new world dawning, and he lays tender hands on them. He hugs them and blesses them. I mean, think of it. This man from God, this epitome, this embodiment of the Almighty, hugs kids and says, these are the heart of the matter. You know, it only takes one generation to change the world. And I still say loving the kids stands the best chance of doing it. But all the mother love in the world has a hard time against the hatred and bullying, the indifference of all the other big people. You know, by all studies, the violent and brutal out there are invariably those who've been brutalized or neglected as little folk. And this does not excuse them for 1 minute or relieve them of their responsibility for their acts as adults, but it does tell us where to start, with tender, caring love of the kids. And then finally, we need to note that the reason for training and tender loving care is not just their welfare, but our own. We need time with them also, so that we can get to know and enjoy them over the years. Is there anything sadder than a man who discovers one day that he really does not know his children? And we need training also, and that training is what taking care of children provides. They do that for us as well. They train us to pay attention to and care for more than our own hobbies and toys and interests, our own self-fulfillment, our own sleep. They're on the job 24 hours a day, making grown-ups out of us. As Michael Novak of the American Enterprise Institute said so succinctly, the trouble with children is that from the day the first one arrives, we can no longer be children. And we need their tender, loving care as well, because in it we meet the love of God afresh. If you were here a couple of weeks ago, the young people spoke of their experiences of the church and where especially they experienced the presence of God in their lives. Did you notice what they spoke of most? They spoke of the time they spent with the kids in Sunday school, loving and being loved. And of course, you know, it's no accident that young couples begin to get religious. When? When the children arrive. And children do have a spirituality that can teach us and shape us and move us. They give as much or more than they get. A gal by the name of Nancy Fuchs writes, this year as usual, my children asked me, what do you want for Mother's Day? I was stumped. How could anything, a pair of earrings, even a flowering plant, compare with the best gift I ever got? When my first child was born, I was studying religion in an academic setting, had been doing so for 12 years. I'd read many theologians, Jewish and Christian, Muslim and Buddhist. Yet now as I nurse my daughter through long gray nights, I gaze into her big, expectant eyes and I panic. What did I have to teach her about what really mattered? During those 4 a.m. feedings, I gradually figured out one thing. All the theology I'd studied would not tell me how to raise my children. But maybe it would work in reverse. The best theologians I noticed have done some field work in living. I would do mine with the kids. Maybe at playgroups. For years I sat at kitchen counters, on living room sofas, on playroom floors. I questioned mothers about what they did all day long, at special times and ordinary times, and I asked what they learned about their spiritual lives from being parents. A spiritual life, the first mother shrieked, I'm up to my elbows in peanut butter sandwiches, and you want to know about my spiritual life? Check in 10 years. But I soon found out, after initial protest, it turns out that living with small children is a crash course in the great themes of our faith: grace, creation, discipline, forgiveness, mystery. And I found out that many parents do find ways to transform the drudgery of the daily care of their children into opportunities for spiritual experience. Spirituality not as some huge, distant, elusive thing, rather as something tucked into the ordinary moments of waking and eating and giving a bath, or even tucking a child into bed. Raising children, of course, is very different from other spiritual disciplines. Once we embark, we can't turn back, decide some other option might be more fulfilling, give the baby back and sign up for a yoga class. For better or for worse, this is our path for all the years to come. So if you and your child or your grandchild can reach into your hearts to give new meaning together, to a song, a game, a ritual, or a prayer to grace your journey, it may turn out to be the Mother's Day of a lifetime. Which leads me to a challenging question. What if, in this age so impressed with celebrity and wealth and power, what if we experienced most powerfully the grace and claim of God upon our lives in the face and voice of a child? Whoso receives one such little child receives me.